Hello and welcome to another week of VCT Pacific Rostermania updates. We are currently on week number 4. Week 4. It's the month mark. And very different from last year, we're just about done. Most teams all having at least their starting 5, right? Obviously, some teams could still make some changes. But all of them have them quite lined up and ready to go. And we've already seen the teams add quite a few off-season events, including the 10 Valorant Invitational that just happened this past weekend down in Busan here in Korea. So without further ado, let's jump in and check out what changes have happened, because obviously I'm a prophet, and as soon as I uploaded the video last week, Gen G said, bam, here's their full roster. So let's talk about Gen G, shall we? They are the first team with the big changes last week. So they rounded out their full 5 with 2 new additions. They had Yeoman and Foxy9. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I saw Yeoman coming for Gen G, nonetheless. I mean, a lot of people hoped that Yeoman would be joining a Pacific team, finally getting a shot to prove himself at the highest level, because if you didn't know, Yeoman has been kind of the talk of the town within Tier 2 in Korea and China, just overall in Asia, for quite some time now, because he is a somewhat proven IGL, and those are quite rare. I think a lot of people recognized Yeoman once he was on Rare Atom, and they had that big run in China where they even got, some matches against EDG, and they got so close to making it in over DRG into Ascension, but they could not. But either way, whether they won Ascension or not, afterwards, most of the team was taken on by JDG, but a choice had to be made since they had 2 imports, and it was either between Stu and Yeoman, and they decided to keep the star player, the flashy duelist Stu, and Yeoman, the IGL, was cut and released from the team, or I guess not accepted into JDG. We all know that didn't quite pan out very well, and Yeoman then returned. He played in Nongshim Red Force all year this year, and he looked pretty decent. Now, he wasn't exactly dealt the best hand. They had a lot of rookies on this team, and there seemed to be some stubbornness either from Yeoman or the coaching staff, or maybe both, in terms of their own interpretation and roles and comps and whatnot. But overall, I would say, especially on maps like Lotus, where Yeoman would have been playing on for a little bit now, you could tell that the mid-round reads and overall kind of round-round adjustments and taking the cues from the other team on what the setups are, things like that, what the tendencies are going to be, and how to rotate around the map, knowing the timings, he was quite ahead of a lot of the other IGLs within Challengers Korea for most of this year. He also basically led 2 teams with a bunch of rookies into quite some success, where they actually made it all the way to the very last map of the grand finals of Challengers Korea, where they might have been the team that actually went to Ascension instead of Senprisa Gaming. It would have been a bit of an upset, but it would have been a very, very cool story, and it was possible for sure. So with all that said, Yeoman, proven IGL, and even on Nongshim, when push comes to shove, if he has to buckle down and clutch up for the team, they've had several games where he's top ranking, or he's clutching up insane rounds to bring them over the finish line. And so I think, he was a name to still be discussed. However, I would argue that seeing how the meta had changed and what type of teams were succeeding and what type of calling was succeeding all throughout 2024, I used to be a huge Yeoman advocate, and I actually wrapped up the Challengers year for 2024 thinking, Yeoman's still good. I would love to see him at a higher tier. However, not unlike the beginning part of the year, I would not be hard advocating, right? I wouldn't be sitting here being like, if he doesn't get picked up again, like, none of the teams are doing their job. Because last year and beginning of this year, I was almost ready to do that for the Korean teams. But after the year, I thought absolutely worth a shot. Check him out, right? Bring him in for trials, see how he shows. Obviously, IGLing value is very, very subjective, but not to the point where I thought, I mean, this is a must upgrade for any team, especially a team like Gen G, where you had an IGL that was very successful for the whole year of 2024. So this announcement was a bit out of left field, but it all did make sense once I really thought about it, right? You lost Lakia, who clearly had a lot of value in the comms as whenever the players talked about him. And then, sure, he still had some clutch rounds, but he was the inconsistent weak factor when it came to fragging and putting up numbers on the scoreboard. So you bring in Yeoman, who I would argue had shown quite a bit of consistency in his own mechanics. Yes, he still has his ups and downs too, but that's when he was main IGLing. So maybe you saw something, in him during the trials where you're like, okay, if he doesn't have to main IGL, if he's not the primary caller, maybe he can be even more consistent, which would be a huge boon and an upgrade over Lakia. And then that because he used to do his own calling, he would be a very, very good side caller as long as you can keep like styles and egos in check. And then you have the coaching staff of Solo and HSK, who have clearly done a lot of work with Munchkin throughout this year in terms of improving how to read and call Valorant. So when I saw that announcement, at first I was a little surprised, but the more I thought about it, the more I really liked it. And if their performance at the 10 Valorant Invitational is anything to go by, this is a very promising start for Yeoman. Now, on top of that, Foxy9 was announced as another member here for Gen G, filling in the very, very, very large shoes of Meteor. And I would have said that my expectation for Foxy9 would have been, okay, we saw the potential whenever he was playing Sentinel this year on DRX. I think we would continue to see the potential, but Meteor is just such a titan, right, to step into the same role of. And Meteor was opening up just so many opportunities, so many rounds, so many timings for this team and how they operated that I just wasn't sure if Foxy9 could pull that off, because that clearly comes with the experience as well and keeping a cool head and all of that. So I wondered if Foxy9 could do it. I would say that, obviously, again, take it with a grain of salt. The 10 Valorant Invitational it's a relatively small off-season tournament, so we don't want to read into it too much. But at the very least, Foxy9, first of all, looked very happy, right? He looked very comfortable. It's kind of similar to the RB vibes once he went to TEC over in China. So he looked very happy, he looked very comfy, and he was fragging. So this is a good sign. I would say Foxy9 performed very, very, very slightly above my expectations. My expectations for him weren't low, but I also don't want to overrate just one off-season tournament. That's not huge, right? It's not like a full-on bracket and things like that. So I don't want to read into it too much, but I think at the very least, he's right where a lot of people would have wanted him to be, which is, okay, clearly your mechanics have the potential to fill in the shoes. You might need a little bit of time, but now what we are really waiting for is, can you be self-sufficient in the decision-making and the type of timings and space that you're creating for the rest of the team? That will come with time, and also obviously the meta could change as well, so we don't really know where that's going to sit. But hey, worst case, Foxy9 can be a little bit flexible as well, so I don't see this as a problem at all. I actually think this is very, very promising, and having seen them in action, knowing the names on this team, I would argue that Gen G fully has the possibility of making a similar, if not better, run again in 2025. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say that they're going to, just because team factors there's so many other factors that go into this, and then the competition, I would say, has upgraded for sure. So it's going to be very tough, but I would not say that Gen G is downgraded, right? I would say that they are overall side graded, but maybe upgraded, right? Because then you're having to consider like Charon's probably getting better. They, I think, probably realized some of the misses they had towards the end of the year in terms of the meta and reads like that. So the coaching staff will have learned a lot of things, obviously the remaining members as well. I'm going to argue that I think Yeoman is a slight upgrade over Lakia. We don't know the exact calling structure, but just from what I've seen in their careers so far. So all of that considered, as much as Meteor was my guy, like if I had a one pick from Gen G, it was Meteor, I would argue that Foxy9 can fill the shoes enough that the rest of the factors point to this potentially being a slight upgrade, even at the start of the year. So Gen G fans, rejoice, rest assured, you don't have to worry, you didn't have to wait all off season. This is a great place to be, and we will continue to see them in the future as well. So we'll see how things go. DRX did also play at the 10 Valorant Invitational alongside Talon. Now, DRX was playing with Athan or Atan. I don't know what they're going to end up sticking with. They're calling him Atan in Korean because I think they're just basing it off of Leviathan. But obviously, the way it's written in English, it looks like it should be read Ethan. Who knows? Maybe he'll have a proper name change. I don't know. But anyway, this guy was on the academy team. He comes in, slotting in, playing a little bit of that flex, a little bit of that flash initiator for the team. But otherwise, it does appear that flashback is going to be the flex/info initiator, and freeing is going to be the sentinel. So I was wrong. I would have, but here's the thing. I was wrong. A lot of the fans were expecting this to be what happened just because we've already seen flashback flex a little bit. But playing info initiator, playing main initiator is very different than playing things like Clove and KO, where you, at the end of the day, you're looking to just be aggressive and you're looking to aim duel, right? Initiator, primary initiator is a very, very specific role. And I just don't know. There's obviously a number of things that are still very, very raw and green with this roster for DRX. But I don't know if agents like Sova, even over time, would really fit the way flashback plays. We'll have to see. But I mean, I think flashback thrives in situations where he's like, oh yeah, like, you know, bring on another one. Let's go. Aim duel. Let's go again. Like, I'm re-peaking this, right? I'm challenging it again. He thrives in those situations, whether it's as a sentinel or some other type of slightly aggressive, self-sufficient agent. So I just don't know if he will get into the mindset. Obviously, he's mechanically so gifted, but I don't know if he'll eventually ever get into the mindset of a info/primary initiator, where this is why really, really good primary initiators stand out a lot, because they are able to keep a very, very cool head in terms of calculating util, but then they don't slack off on their mechanics at all. So I don't know, just because of what I've seen in terms of how they play Sentinel and how they fight and things like that, I would have thought maybe it would have been worth it to give Freeing a chance to flex around. We don't know if this is finalized roles or not yet. Obviously, they have plenty of time to switch it around a little bit if they want an experiment. They're going to be in more tournaments all the way through the offseason, so they'll get plenty of experience. But then the question also becomes, okay, so if Ethan or Atan is not going to work out, if you don't think he's ready, who are you going to pick up in that role, right? I mean, Bane is sitting around. He's still a restricted free agent, but what's going to happen here? Like, what's the end goal here for DRX? Because they haven't confirmed that Atan would be on the starting roster of the main squad. So we'll have to see. I think some people might have been disappointed by DRX's performance just because they eventually, didn't get very high. Obviously, again, the format of the 10 Valorant Invitational doesn't really lend itself to giving you a good gauge. But I would say if you're disappointed, I think you are just living in the past. I think you're just slightly misguided. I think you're still just a little bit too nostalgic. I would argue that they played exactly how I expected them to. The only other option would have been if Hyunmin was like super, super, super goated, right? Same with Atan. And therefore, they didn't need as much teamwork, but like their pure mechanics actually carried the teamwork. The only other option would have been, you suddenly look at this, and you're like, oh, this is the making of a God Squad. Like, it's coming, right? Like, they're going to come in and they're going to be the new Gen G, where they just come and start swinging and they take trophies. That's the only other option it really would have been. It's hard to have a middle ground when you have a basically entirely new roster. Only Mako and Flashback are carried over, and even at that, Flashback didn't play the entire year, and even if he did, it's only 1 year, and he's having a role swap. Mako's IGLing for the first time, and only for 6 months so far. This is a very, very, very new squad, both in terms of overall experience compared to the previous rosters, but also the combination. So I think we just saw all the weaknesses that a team goes through when they're in that situation. Watching how they play at the 10 Valorant Invitational, you had some basic ideas, but you couldn't be that flexible. Clearly, the comms were not as smooth. People were not entirely on the same page, and I would argue that Hyunmin also wasn't playing as explosive as you would have needed to overcome that. Whether they want him to and whether he wants to down the road or not is a totally different question. But I'm just saying the only other way they would have had better results at the 10 Valorant Invitational is if Hyunmin was just like going crazy, which he was not. He was struggling. A little bit. And I think it was probably a bit of a reality check for him coming in and playing against the top. But if you're a DRX fan, I would say I don't think you should be worried yet. I mean, it's certainly on. They're going to go through so many growing pains. And I'm okay with this as long as they are committed. I'm okay with this as long as they're committed, as long as they show progress, as long as they are growing, which is something that I think DRX consistently struggled to commit to for a number of reasons. But I think the pressure is like all off. Yes, you got the furthest from Pacific at Champs, but it's not like you got to the finals or anything. So it was more of just a decent note to finish on for DRX. But especially with all these roster changes, no one's expecting DRX to be the number one team coming into 2025. You still have hopes just because of the brand and some of the players, but the pressure is off. So hopefully they can now chill out and say, all right, we're growing, right? We're where some of these other teams used to be, and we'll see what they can cook up. The big question still remains to be seen about what's going to happen with Bane, but we'll see. Oh yeah, I was going to ask the Korean casters that were there, because we saw that Argency had called the timeout, and some of the social media posts or the pictures that I've seen only saw Argency, so I'm not sure if Termi and Glow were there at all. I believe the $10 Invitational is the same one where Termi showed up last year to walk in, and then he just pieced. So I don't know what's going on here with the $10 Invitational, but we'll see. I'll have to do some digging. When it comes to Talon, I would argue better looking, right? Premion main duelist looks pretty solid. I think that consistency will be good if they can stick to it for the better part. I know that they love to cook, but sometimes, especially with someone so young and so green and just so clearly talented about certain things over other things in terms of their mechanics, I think that's a constant you can afford to have. Overall, they looked really good. I mean, they looked a lot more in sync. Premi looked very comfortable. Obviously, having performances like that helps the overall vibes as well. So Talon, the topic's always consistency for Talon, so we'll just have to wait and see. But nothing more to talk about there. Let's see. RQ, no changes. Secret, no announcements. T1, nothing has changed. What else? I guess that's really it. I mean, wait. Boom Esports had an announcement. Boom Esports has confirmed that DOS9 will be joining them as their last member of the starting five. So DOS9 is coming in, taking the place of Zespiu. And if you didn't watch any Ascension or Challenger South Asia, DOS9 was playing on Revenant Esports alongside the likes of SK Rossi, and then of course Sultan made a very, very big name for himself alongside DOS9 at Ascension. I would say both of them are the Kazakhstan players. So the Kazakhs, they looked very good mechanically. I thought in terms of just pure gun skill and individual gameplay, I think Sultan impressed me a bit more, but DOS9 was playing a bit more flexible. So obviously the roles and maybe therefore some more decision making comes in favor for DOS9 as well. Listen, I have nothing against the DOS9 pickup. I think DOS9 is great. I was hoping that we could see both DOS9 and Sultan at least, some of these teams in Pacific. Sultan still seems to be a most likely not scenario, which is very unfortunate. But hey, at least we get to see DOS9, and I'm excited to watch him, and I think he's going to do just fine. I think individually he's going to do just fine. I think he's a great pickup for any team, but the question is does he fit into Boom Esports, which, I mean, who knows? A lot of people seem to be concerned about the comms as well, having to switch all to English. The owner of Boom has said that, well, they're playing ranked in English anyway. I don't think comms should be a problem, which is fair. I would argue that pro matches comms are still a little bit different when it comes to high pressure situations, but you have 3 months. So I think clearly they are comfortable talking Valorant in English if they're saying that publicly. So I think it's a matter of getting used to it, breaking out of the habit of speaking Indonesian, and worst case, DOS9 could still pick up on a couple of the keywords so that in a panic moment you can still pick up on the words that you need to understand. I'm not too worried about it, but I'm just saying I would argue that pro match comms are still a very different thing. So pacing is so important and clarity is so important. So we'll just have to wait and see. Well, here's actually, before we move on, here's a good analogy. So when I used to host the ESL events and when I used to work for ESL, obviously ESL, the headquarters are in Europe, so a lot of the staff are either from like Germany or Poland, etc. And they all speak English just fine. Like the core members of the production staff, they all speak English just fine. We can hold our meetings all in English. There's no problem. There's no language barrier. We're talking over meals, right? We're having a beer. It's all smooth. But when the show is going on live, their sentences are just not as concise. They're not as succinct. They have a thicker accent. It's coming through a microphone on a headset in a loud arena. And like, let's say a tech pause happens and they're trying to give me this like full sentence because they also don't want to be rude, but they also don't know how else to make it more concise in the heat of the moment. And there was an event where I actually had to go backstage during the break, and I semi-snapped, and I was like, listen, worst case, you can be rude, literally just yell in my ear like 2 words, just give me the 2 keywords. Like, I don't want to hear 2 full sentences of what's going on because I have to moderate an analyst desk, right? I can't deal with, and I would argue that I'm one of the better ones about dealing with a different voice in one ear versus the other ear, because obviously I do that for translating as well. But also, like, when it's droning on for like 2-3 sentences, I'm like, all right, that's done. And so at that point, what happens during the show is I just tune out the producer until I know for sure, right? So I'm just saying, being fluent conversationally and playing games and whatnot is very different than being in high pressure situations where you have to perform and it has to be concise, and saying things that could be said in 1 word but saying them in 2, like, that makes a difference between winning a round and not. So I'm just saying it could still be a factor. I'm not worried about it, but it could be something that they should still be very well aware of and working on. But aside from that, I think DOS9 is a great pickup. Nothing else really changes for Boom Esports. For me, the big question for Boom Esports is still always going to be, Famous, Berserks, and then I would say NC Slasher. Like, can they get more consistent? Shiro gets a bit of a pass with his IGLing, and overall, I think he's a very reliable player. But the other 3, like, when they're great, they're really great. But when they're not, it's a little questionable. So they're going to be up against very, very tough competition. But this is not a chance they want to squander. So that's the big one. And with that, we're ready to wrap up Rostermania, more or less. Just 3 teams left out of the 12 to really confirm the full starting 5. But even then, DRX is already still participating in these offseason tournaments, so that's good. That's a good sign. Overall, this offseason has been off to a great start. We've already had good events going on, and quite a few. We already have all these teams confirming their starting 5. I think it's just giving us a very, very good look, prepping us for a good look into what 2025 is going to feel like, and probably a proper teaser on what to expect from these teams, unless Riot decides to put out another patch like 2 weeks before the very first match of 2025. So as long as that doesn't happen, I think we should have a pretty good grasp of what to expect. And then we still have so much more. I'm going down to Gwangju in Korea this weekend to cast with Paperthin for the GES, the Gwangju Esports Series. And that's another small one. It's just 2 Korean teams, 2 Chinese teams. Bit of a fun little China versus Korea, Korea versus China format. But hey, at least we get to get more looks at Shinji and T1 from the Korean side, and then a little bit of EDG and Trace Esports. In case you're wondering, EDG is not coming over with Kong Kong and Smoggy, so they are playing with 2 subs brought up from their trainees, their academy team, or their academy roster. So it's not going to be full-on, full-force tournament, but it should still be a fun one. And of course, as the offseason continues, we're going to see more tournaments being played, more offseason events being played on 9.08 and future patches. So that's exciting, right? So the map changes coming in, some of these agent changes coming up. That should all be good fun as well. So if we don't get big roster news next week, we might just wait until the rest of the rosters are finalized and start to pivot back into a little bit of the meta analysis, kind of sink our teeth in slowly but surely into the meta development of VCT. Of course, there's Game Changers Championship coming up as well, which I'll just say this since we're talking about it right now. I am actually going to be casting on the Korean side for the majority of that tournament, so I'm going to be pretty busy for that. So I'll be watching, but probably not watch partying or anything like that. But again, lots to look forward to. I have to mention, of course, SVL coming up as well. That's just rebranded from the old AVL from last year, which is the Africa TV League. It's the same company. It's just they rebranded from Africa TV to Soup. I don't know which one's better, but I think Soup's probably better. So anyway, that's the SVL. They already announced which teams are getting invited for that. So that should be exciting towards the end of the year here in Seoul as well. It's a lot coming up, but I think just paced and spread out just enough. So this is a good off season. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a comment below to help out with the algorithm. If you have nothing better to say, then you can just leave the acronym of your favorite team here in VCT Pacific. Let me know who you're cheering for. And of course, if you like talking Valorant with me, then feel free to join us on the live stream, as well as during the off season. I'm trying to stream most, if not all, the weekdays as much as I can, no matter how short. So we might be playing other games, but we're always open to talking Valorant and VCT, as there's going to always be a lot to talk about out here in the VCT world. Well, that's going to be it for now. Hope you guys enjoy this episode, and we will wait to hear from Global Esports, Team Secret, and DRX. See you next time.